June 4th, 1942. Dawn breaks over 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soru, Hiru, cutting through the Pacific near Midway Atoll. The flight decks smell like hot oil and fresh paint. Crews move bombs and torpedoes by hand across steel that feels untouchable. These decks are untouchable, they tell each other, and they believe it. 4 floating cities against American pilots, flying obsolete planes with no fighter cover. Ensign George Gay sits in a Douglas Devastator, a torpedo bomber so slow and heavy it's basically a flying coffin. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet is approaching without escorts. What the Japanese crews don't know yet, within minutes, their untouchable decks will be burning. The question isn't whether the carriers will fall, it's how a squadron of doomed pilots in slow planes will make it happen. Jack Dusty Kleiss is a naval aviator with a Kansas drawl and steady hands. He sits in his cockpit 14,000 feet up, feeling the groan of his dive brakes, that strange calm right before everything accelerates. His orders are simple. Find the carriers, hit them where it matters, get back alive if you can. Below, the Japanese carriers are in the middle of rearming. Fuel lines run along the edges and through the hangars. On paper, the armor looks good, the firefighting system's solid, but a carrier refueling and rearming is a bomb magazine with a roof. George Gay is an ensign from Texas, young-looking with an easy smile. He's sitting low in his Devastator, flying straight toward the Japanese fleet. Torpedo Squadron 8 has no fighter cover this morning. The formation stays tight until Japanese fighters pour out to meet them. Cannon fire cracks across the water, sending up spray. Gay keeps the plane level long enough to drop his torpedo, a weapon that needs a straight, low approach to work. Someone on the radio says, "Keep it straight." Everything narrows down to the sight of a ship's hull and the seconds left in his lungs. When his plane goes down, Gay grabs a seat cushion and hits the water. The ocean tastes like fuel, but his failed attack does something critical. It pulls every Japanese fighter down to wave level, eyes locked the wrong direction. Minutes later, the sky opens up for the dive bombers coming down from altitude. Kleiss rolls into his dive. The brakes scream, the altimeter needle drops, and blood rushes to his head. The ocean swings up where the sky should be. The carrier looks like a playing card in his windscreen, getting closer. He keeps that image locked while flak explodes all around him. He releases his bomb. One explosion hits the deck, and suddenly every careful plan falls apart. Fuel ignites and spreads. Parked planes catch fire like dominoes. A ship that looked like a city becomes a place where men crawl with fire hoses, where one wrong valve turn means losing an entire hangar. By the end of the day, 4 Japanese fleet carriers are burning and sunk. America loses one, the Yorktown, which they abandon. Torpedo Squadron 8 loses every plane in the attack. Of that entire group, only 1 pilot survives. Gay is still in the water, squinting through the sting, counting smoke columns and remembering names. Heat stays on his face as a ship's name disappears into the smoke. Hundreds of miles away, another crew limps home in a shattered Avenger. A 17-year-old radio man named Harry Ferrier presses his hand against his own wound while keeping the radio working in a cockpit full of broken glass. Ensign Albert Kyle Ernest has the throttle pushed to the limit, saying out loud what nobody wants to hear. We either land on that coral or we don't land at all. They do land. The Avenger is riddled with bullet holes, dozens of them. The turret gunner, Jay Manning, is dead. Ferrier is pale but steady. Ernest sits in the cockpit, breathing shallow, surrounded by cracked instruments. Men who shouldn't be alive make it home, and their survival is what ties this story together. Bruno Peter Guido is a machinist's mate who made quick decisions in the rear seat. His choice under fire is straightforward. Clear the jam, keep the gun firing, buy the pilot another second of life. Later, he'll be shot down and captured, and his ending won't be the one he deserves. That's part of the cost nobody talks about in the victory reports. That's why the men who came home speak quietly when they remember this morning. The dive bombers won because of timing. A carrier refueling and rearming, with its flight deck crowded with planes and weapons, is a system sitting on a knife's edge. One explosion on that open deck scatters burning fuel and shrapnel into rows of parked aircraft. Smoke gets pulled through air vents meant to feed fresh air to engines. Damage control needs time and water pressure to seal off sections. But over Midway, that late morning, there was no time. The bombs didn't need to hit the thickest armor. They just needed to find the place where a dozen rush decisions made to launch the next attack fast had left the ship vulnerable enough to shock even its own crew. By afternoon, the counterpunch comes. Japanese planes from Hiru find the Yorktown. American sailors feel the ship sink under their boots as damage control fights back. Both sides had skilled people. The reversal was real. It wasn't magic or luck. It was a window in time, opened at terrible cost by one group and used with speed and skill by another. Kleiss pulls out inches above water that looks like concrete. Gay stays quiet as the sun gets low, hoping someone will spot him. Ernest coaxes his wreck toward the runway while Ferrier, bleeding, keeps his hand on the radio and counts down the miles. By 1943, the war was keeping score in a way nobody wanted to see: empty seats. The ready room that used to buzz with energy, packed with pilots who could fly through anything, was changing. Younger faces started showing up, and the old guys were getting worn down. There's a Japanese Navy fighter pilot named Kaname Harada, the kind of guy who notices everything. He remembers when every takeoff felt like it would work out. The pilots he flew with back in 41 and 42 had real training, hundreds of hours in the air before they ever fired a shot. These guys could land in a crosswind on a handkerchief and still crack jokes while doing it. Then 1944 hit, and everything shifted. Training got shorter, practice turned into rush jobs. It takes years to make a skilled pilot. It takes days to lose one. A crew chief watches a new pilot walk the wrong direction on the dark deck. A maintenance guy holds a broken part and knows the replacement won't get here this week. A squadron commander has to send up a mix of veterans and brand new pilots because he has no other option. By day's end, you count heads and do math you don't want to do. June 1944, over the Philippine Sea, you can see the problem clearly. American radar keeps putting fighters in the right place. On paper, both sides still have carriers. But in reality, one side has experience, good training, and a system that replaces losses. The other side has kids who were in school a few months ago. One day unfolds. You launch before sunrise. You fight twice. By afternoon, half the ready room is gone. Names get erased from the board. The veteran who led your section isn't coming back. The young guy sitting in his seat now is just twisting a pencil in his fingers, listening to the next briefing. Harada said later that the war taught him something about what belief actually costs. Confidence becomes a weight you can't carry on willpower alone. Training works like an assembly line. Each stage takes time. Cut any of it short, and everything that comes after gets riskier. Same with maintenance. You've got inspection schedules, lubrication dates, parts that need replacing. When fuel runs low, flying hours get cut. When spare parts are hard to find, broken pieces stay in the air too long. A carrier can look powerful from a distance and still be completely empty inside when you look at the quiet numbers that matter. In that June battle, the American side, experienced pilots, good radar, a real supply of fresh crews, shoots down so many Japanese planes that people call it a turkey shoot. In the cockpit, it feels like winning. But what comes after? Ships with big decks, still flying flags, but air groups that can't handle a full day of real fighting. If you want to know why a ship like Zuikaku gets sunk the way it does at Leyte, don't start with the steel, start with the people. Pilots who knew their planes inside and out get replaced by guys who can read the manual but don't have that gut feeling when something goes wrong. The best commanders try. They spread the veterans out, write notes for the new guys, slow things down at night. It helps. But it can't replace what's actually missing. On the other side, America has the factories and the training system to send a fresh replacement pilot the next day. Meanwhile, a Japanese deckhand is fighting fires nobody on his shift has actually fought before. The line started bending at Midway, and by fall 1944, it bends into something you can't come back from. Ships are still big, the wakes are still white, but the men inside know. They feel it when fires take longer to put out. They see it when the young guys freeze for a half second at a sound they don't recognize. They carry it in their arms and their backs. That feeling, that's where this story really lives. October 25th, 1944, off Cape Engaño. The Zuikaku is moving through the water like something exhausted. Sailor Shigetoshi Kaneko is standing on deck, holding a hose coupling, his mouth already tasting salt and oil. The day starts loud, alarms screaming, boots running everywhere, orders shouted back and forth. He and the other men brace themselves like waiting for a wave you can't see coming. When the first hit lands, the deck jumps, the ship's sound changes, the pumps start working. The steel shrieks. The men move. Then another hit comes, and the ship starts tilting. It's not small anymore. Nobody can pretend it's not happening. The damage control crews work on pure instinct, close off one section, flood another one to trap the damage, get foam on the fire before it climbs up the walls. When you're running on fumes and muscle memory, things slow down. A hose kinks at the wrong second. A valve won't turn when it needs to. Two guys talk at the same time and the fire takes advantage. The ship keeps listing more and more. Doors that were easy to seal during drills now need your whole body and a lot of luck. A petty officer at a ladder is counting people off, pushing men through a hatch into smoke that tastes like metal. The Americans don't quit. They learn from the morning attacks and come back harder in the afternoon. Wave after wave, right on schedule. Every explosion adds weight to the problem. Kaneko's world shrinks down to one piece of deck, 10 guys around him, 3 things to do. Then something changes. The fire finds more to burn, and somebody yells 3 words, abandoned ship. Kaneko runs for the rail with everyone else as the deck tilts under his feet. He glances back at the island and sees a flag he's looked at every day. For a second he hesitates, but survival is urgent. He goes. The sea is hot and slick with oil. His lips and teeth coat with it. The first breath burns. The second is worse. Men thrash around trying to get away from the burning patches. The ship's angles change. The propellers are out of the water now, the bow pointing up. Then the whole thing tips and goes under. The Zuikaku sinks. She's the last carrier left from Pearl Harbor. The ocean swallows her like it doesn't care. The ship keeps heeling over past 20 degrees, then keeps going. The men who ran those hose teams are paying another price in the water now. Oil burns on top, and you have to find a clear spot just to survive. A guy near Kaneko yells for a friend. The answer comes back quiet, if it comes at all. A ship stays afloat because water pushes up against the weight pushing down. When a torpedo rips it open, water floods into spaces that were supposed to stay dry. When you fight the fire, you pump water into different spaces to smother the flames. Every bucket of water that hits the deck has to go somewhere. When too much weight shifts down and to one side, the balance breaks. The ship gets easier to tip with every degree. You feel it under your feet. The pumps can't keep up. Trying to fix it with more water just makes different choices terrible. At some point, ladders turn sideways and orders don't matter anymore. You're just hoping. When it breaks, it sounds like it. Bolts snap. Steam shoots out where it shouldn't. A man 3 feet away becomes impossible to hear because of the angle of his head in the water. Kaneko tastes oil again and turns toward a clean stretch of sea. He counts without thinking about it. When he looks back at his ship, it's gone. All those guys working their tails off this afternoon, it wasn't enough. Because months ago, somebody cut the maintenance budget. Last week, a shipment of spare parts never showed up. This morning, several of the best hose team members were already dead. The enemy is good and won't stop. Physics sank the Zuikaku, but it got help. What really killed her was running out of the one thing that mattered. Experienced sailors who knew what to do. November 28th and 29th, 1944. The Shinano slides out into darkness, the biggest aircraft carrier in the world, so new the paint still smells fresh. She used to be a battleship before they converted her, and the crew is standing at their stations as this massive steel city moves into the black water off the coast of Honshu. The thing is, she's not actually finished yet. Some of the watertight doors don't close the way they're supposed to. Not every system has even been tested for real. But there's an order to move out, a deadline to hit. So the crew, sailors, yard workers, everyone heads out anyway. Out in that black water, the Archerfish's control room is quiet. Just voices and numbers. The skipper, Joseph Enright, isn't yelling. Finding the right angle to fire is like doing geometry while you're sweating through your clothes. The stopwatch is running. The torpedo data computer spits out numbers. They get ready, and when the torpedoes launch, The submarine just waits and counts. The first torpedo hits the Shinano like a punch in the gut. The ship lurches, and a damage control petty officer, hands calloused, grease under his nails, takes orders down a ladder. His eyes are already red from steam where there shouldn't be any. So they start counter-flooding. You flood one part of the ship to balance out the weight in another. Someone draws a chalk line on the deck, rough and practical, just to watch the ship's tilt getting worse and worse. The pumps are screaming, the men are screaming without really meaning to. The ship's like something trying to breathe with water in its lungs. There's too many faces to keep track of, each person with their own story that doesn't care about ship statistics. What actually kills the Shinano is simple math. The watertight doors aren't sealed tight enough. A modern ship is supposed to survive getting hit by keeping water locked behind metal barriers that designers planned years ago, sealed up tight by shipyard workers who took pride in their work. But what happens if some of those seals aren't finished? What if you send a ship out before she's really ready? Then men in the dark do the work the shipyard should have done. They seal doors, drag hoses, hook up portable pumps, and listen hard. They're hoping to hear the pump suck air instead of water. But what they usually hear is the sound every damage control guy dreads. A pump that's taking in way more water than it can handle. In the Archerfish's control room, pulling the trigger is just one step on a checklist. Torpedoes are just bubbles and steel and a team that knows how to wait. The submarine crew never sees the faces of the men they're killing. They measure what happened by the angle of a ship they can barely see on the horizon and by a chalk line they'll never actually see, tilting faster and faster as time goes on. The Shinano's crew tries everything the manual says and then some things it doesn't. A messenger takes an order down a hallway that's ankle deep in water and comes back to report it's knee deep now. It's still rising, he says. Someone seals a hatch that traps men on the wrong side of it, but he does it anyway because there's hundreds more on the right side. The ship groans. You feel it more than hear it. Those walls that were built to hold from front to back are being pushed sideways in a way nobody ever designed them for. They hold for a while, but not forever. Keeping water out isn't just something you say, it's something you have to do right, every single time. Every door that doesn't close perfectly is a broken promise. Every gasket that's not finished right is a failure waiting to happen, and it happens exactly when you need it not to. When a torpedo punches a hole, water wants to level out. If you can't control where that water goes, it decides for you. Counterflooding only works if you know exactly which sections are going to fill up and which ones won't. On the Shinano, too many of those guesses are wrong. After about 7 hours, the math wins, the tilt gets worse, and men have to choose between the latter and doing things by the book. The submarine crew marks the time and heads home. The men in the water breathe the same fuel-stained air that other survivors breathed before them. Somewhere out in that darkness, a petty officer knows the feel of a valve wheel in his hands, knows it in his bones. He closes his eyes and wishes for one more hour, an hour he isn't going to get. Kure, 1947. Steel looks completely different when you're burning it down. The paint bubbles up, then flakes away. A worker catches a gust of hot iron smell in his throat and grins without thinking about it, because it's the exact same smell from years back when these docks were alive with rivet guns and the names of warships echoing down the slipways. Now, with the same hands, he runs the torch along a seam on a plate the color of rain. A small crest that used to be bolted to the side drops onto a wooden pallet with a dull thud. Someone yells, "Hold it! Cut here!" The crane groans in answer. Flames trace old welds while gulls fight over scraps at the water's edge. A foreman whose gray hair remembers a different uniform points with a gloved hand, and the crew on the line lets the chain go slack. Down comes a section, big as a house, settling into the yard with a final sigh. During coffee breaks, guys joke about building something that won't try to kill them. Quieter stories get told about men who aren't around anymore. A younger worker asks an older one about what it feels like when a ship's deck gives way, and the older guy just says, "You know it in your knees." They both watch the sparks fly. The yards that used to be called arsenals are turning into regular shipyards. The cranes that lifted armor plating now lift cargo, hold panels. You could add up all the tonnage they've cut and all they've built, draw a chart that bends right where the war ended. Or you could just put your hand on a new plate stamped for a merchant ship and say a quiet prayer, the way shipyard guys do when they send something out into the world that floats and keeps people safe. The past sticks around in pockets. A brass valve handle, a deck light, a few rivets that didn't get swept up. One day a kid will play with that deck light on a kitchen floor while someone explains it came from a warship, and now the same steel might be part of a bridge upriver. You cut along the seams so the heat doesn't warp a section you might use again. Rig it carefully, chains and slings that can handle twice the weight you think you're lifting. Cool the cuts with water so the fire doesn't spread. Read the plans for a ship that doesn't exist anymore, and stay humble, because old steel can hide cracks under the paint from days you never lived through. Down the yard, other crews are measuring twice and fitting old frames with plates from a completely different life. An angle grinder screams loud enough you feel it in your teeth. On the other side of the fence, a kid covers his ears and laughs. It all started with a pilot rolling upside down and a sailor swallowing seawater. It ends with a crest plate cut into a rectangle and stacked to ship out. The same hands that once loaded a torpedo now guide a cargo hatch into place. Eyes that used to scan the water for periscopes now look for a weld that might crack at sea. A man with a torch burns through a plate below where the flight deck used to be. He stops for a second, then leans into the hiss. Sparks rain down. Someone calls for the chain. The section lifts. The crane turns. In the same basin where gray warships used to leave for battle, a new civilian ship's frame goes up, and the steel sings the same note for a brand new life.